Welcome to No Sleep, where the night never ends, and every whisper in the dark could be something real. Tonight's story isn't just horror. It's a memory, a warning, a door that should have stayed closed. So turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and whatever you do, don't fall asleep. The trees loomed like silent sentinels on either side of the old mountain road, their dark limbs stretching overhead to block out even the faintest glimmer of the late afternoon sun. It was quiet, unnaturally so. Not even the wind dared to rustle the leaves. My name is Michael Rains, and I'm a staff writer for the Fair Hollow Chronicle, a paper so small we still ran crossword puzzles by hand. That morning, my editor called me before sunrise. A school bus had been found after going missing 3 days prior. The same bus that was carrying over 20 children from Chestnut Ridge Elementary on a routine field trip to the city zoo. It vanished off the grid. No calls, no GPS, no witnesses. Only now it had somehow turned up, alone, silent, and surrounded by tape. I pulled my car over just beyond the police barricade at the side of the Hollow Pines Road. The officer on duty barely looked at my credentials before letting me through. The whole force was already on site. Silent, pale-faced men and women pacing the perimeter, their eyes darting toward the tree line, and then back to the bus like they were trying not to see something. The bus itself sat half embedded in the muddy ditch, tilted at an unnatural angle like it had crashed, and then tried to get up. The front end was crumpled inward, the windshield splintered into a spiderweb of glass. But that wasn't what made me stop in my tracks. It was the claw marks, long, deep, and gouged straight through metal. Not scratches, not dents. Claw marks, like something with fingers had tried to peel its way inside from every angle. They covered the emergency exit, the windows, even the roof. Something had torn at this thing, like it was desperate to get in, or get out. I felt bile rising in my throat as I stepped closer. A low whistle from behind me made me turn. Officer Ramirez, older, heavyset, with haunted eyes, nodded solemnly. "You're the press?" he asked. I nodded. "They only found one kid alive," he said, voice quiet. "The others, we're still not sure." "What about the driver, the teachers?" He shook his head. "No trace." He leaned in slightly and lowered his voice. "What we find stays off the record unless cleared by the department. Understand? No leaks. This is bigger than you think." I nodded slowly, but my fingers itched on the camera strap around my neck. He turned and walked toward the other officers gathered near the front of the bus. I waited until they were distracted before stepping toward the open bus door, my boots squelching in the half-frozen mud. Inside was worse. The air reeked of rust and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit left too long in the sun. The rows of seats were torn, stuffing leaking out in clumps. The windows were broken inwards, glass scattered across the floor like salt. There were bloodstains, not pools, but smears, like someone had been dragged, or several someones. But the most disturbing thing wasn't the physical damage. It was the silence, not the usual quiet of an empty vehicle. This was heavier, like the air itself refused to carry sound. My breathing felt too loud. Even the soft click of my camera's shutter felt invasive, like I was breaking some ancient rule. And then I saw it. At the back of the bus, slumped against the final row, was a child. He looked about 12, maybe 13, pale, dirt-smudged face, blank eyes staring straight ahead. A paramedic knelt beside him, speaking softly. The boy didn't respond. Not a twitch, not a word. Just breathing, shallow, mechanical, like his mind was locked somewhere far from here. Ramirez leaned into the bus. "Press," Stay up front, he barked. I nodded, but my focus was glued to the boy. I raised my camera for a shot, but as I peered through the lens, something shimmered, just for a moment. In the reflection of the cracked rearview mirror, past the rows of empty seats, I thought I saw something move. Something tall, pale, arms too long for its body, standing just behind the boy. I blinked. It was gone. I lowered the camera slowly. My hands trembled. The officer guiding the boy out passed by me moments later. The kid's feet dragged in the dirt. His eyes, those empty eyes, locked on mine for a second, and he whispered something I almost didn't hear. Don't look in the windows. Before I could ask what he meant, he was gone, swallowed by the flashing lights of an ambulance now arriving. I stayed rooted in place, adrenaline racing. I took another step into the bus, camera raised, focusing on the cracked interior. A bloodstain near the driver's seat caught my attention. I zoomed in. Then I saw the paper, tucked between the seat cushions just behind the driver's chair. Torn, folded. I hesitated, then reached for it. My fingers touched cold, damp fabric. The note slid free with a faint rustle. It was a child's handwriting, shaky, panicked. I don't know what's going on. It took Mr. Charles first. We were on the way to the zoo. Then we heard him scream and blood hit the window. The bus crashed. Some kids are hurt. The teachers are trying to help. Please, if someone finds this. I froze. There was more, but I didn't finish reading. Not yet. A soft sound came from behind me. Not a whisper, not a voice. Breathing, heavy, slow, wrong. I turned sharply. Nothing there. Nothing visible, anyway. I folded the note, tucked it into my coat, and slowly backed out of the bus. Outside, the wind had picked up. The trees were swaying gently now, but the sound wasn't leaves. It was like low voices, dozens of them, crying, chanting. The boy's voice echoed in my mind. Don't look in the windows. They told me not to speak to the boy. Traumatized, they said, barely functioning. He'd been sedated and transported to Fair Hollow General within the hour. But something in me couldn't let it go. The look in his eyes, that hollow, faraway stare. It wasn't just trauma. It was as if part of him hadn't come back from that bus. Later that night, after I'd filed a heavily sanitized draft of the article and pretended to head home, I turned my car toward the hospital instead. I needed answers. Not just for the story, but for myself. I needed to know what he meant by, don't look in the windows. Fair Hollow General was a squat, gray building that always looked underlit. The kind of place where time stood still and corridors never ended. I lied my way past the front desk. Press badge and confident tone worked wonders when you looked exhausted enough. I found him in pediatric trauma room 3B. There he was, sitting up in bed, awake. His name was Elliot. The fluorescent lights buzzed above us as I entered quietly. A nurse passed by without looking. I closed the door behind me. Hey, I said softly. My name's Michael. I was at the crash site today. No response. He sat staring at his lap. His hands were clenched tight around the hospital blanket. I saw you on the bus. You said something to me about the windows. He blinked slowly. Then after a moment, he whispered, You shouldn't be here. His voice was dry, like paper being crumpled. I stepped closer, but gently. I need to know what happened, Elliot. I saw the damage. I saw the notes. I believe something attacked your bus, and I think you know what it was. He looked up at me, eyes sunken, pupils too large. You can't explain it, he said, trembling. Not the way grown-ups want. You can't label it. It's not a man or an animal. It's Outside. Outside? He nodded slowly. Outside the bus. Outside the trees. Outside everything. It watches. Through the windows. That's how it picks you. Picks? If you look back, he said, voice almost a hiss. If it catches your eyes in the glass, you're its. The air in the room felt heavier now, like the ceiling had dropped a few inches. I didn't look, he continued. Not fully, not like the others. That's why I'm still here. But even then, it's not done. Not with me. I pulled out the folded note from my pocket, the one from the bus. I found this, I said. Someone wrote about Mr. Charles being taken first, then the crash, then the hands. Elliot shut his eyes tightly. The hands were only part of it, like fingers of something bigger, something we couldn't see all at once. It didn't break in. It made the bus its own. He opened his eyes again. Sarah saw it first. She thought it was just a shadow. You know how kids are, always pretending things in the dark. But she waved at it. She smiled, then he stopped. I waited. She screamed so loud, he finally whispered, that the windows cracked. I didn't want to ask the next question, but I had to. What happened to her? Elliot stared at me. They took her eyes. Through the glass, she was sitting right beside me. I saw the whole thing, even though I wasn't supposed to. His lips trembled. She was still screaming after they took her eyes. A lump rose in my throat. I didn't realize I'd started backing away until my shoulder hit the door. Elliot's voice hardened. The others didn't listen. They kept peeking. Tommy, Marcus, Jamie. They thought if they just peeked, maybe they'd understand what it was, or how to beat it. But it wanted them to look. That's the trick. It gets in through reflections, mirrors, windows, polished metal. Doesn't matter. What about the teachers? I asked. Did they try to stop it? Elliot looked haunted. Mr. Hopkins told us to stay down, not to make noise. He tried to leave, said he'd get help, but the moment he opened the door, he raised his hand and mimed an explosion with his fingers. There was nothing left, just his shoes and pieces. I was shaking now, not from fear, from a deeper dread, an ancient recognition that something had gone terribly wrong in our world, and I was now a part of it. I swallowed. Why were you the only one who survived? I stopped looking, he said, and then I stopped listening. It speaks too, but only when it's almost got you. It whispers your name through the glass, makes promises, shows you your parents, your dog, your favorite toys, but they're not really there. They're bait. Did you ever hear your name? He nodded. I looked down at the note again. The last line haunted me. See you on the other side, John. John, I murmured. Do you know who that was? Elliot's face paled further. He was my best friend. What happened to him? We made a plan, Elliot said softly. To trick it. We thought if we held of hands and all looked together, we could overwhelm it, like too many reflections would break it. But it didn't work. He began to cry. Quiet, slow tears, like oil down a window pane. It didn't work, and now they're all gone. And I'm still here. I stood frozen in the silence that followed. Then I heard it, a faint, wet tapping at the window. Room 3B was on the second floor. No balcony, no ledge. I turned slowly. Nothing there. Just the glass. But something shimmered inside it, like breath. I grabbed the call button and slammed it repeatedly. A nurse came rushing in, then another. They surrounded the boy, checking vitals, shining flashlights into his eyes. I stumbled back into the hallway, pulse roaring in my ears. One of the nurses shouted for a crash cart. Elliot was convulsing, his mouth foaming. But just before he lost consciousness, he looked at me and smiled. Not a child's smile, something else's. I didn't sleep that night, not for lack of trying. I closed the curtains, turned off every light, unplugged the TV, even stuffed towels under the door. Still, shadows stretched where they shouldn't, and every window seemed to hum with a low, unseen breath. I kept thinking of Elliot, his expression when he smiled. That wasn't a child's smile. By morning, my hands were trembling too much to hold my coffee. So I did what I always do when reality starts to crack. I went back to the story. The bus had been towed to an off-site police impound by then, hidden from public view. But I had my pictures. And more importantly, I had the first note. I laid it on my desk, smoothing the paper with slow, reverent care. The handwriting was frantic, a child's, pressed hard enough into the page that some letters tore the fibers. I don't know what's going on. It took Mr. Charles first. The image leapt into my mind, the driver screaming mid-ride, blood exploding onto the windshield, the entire bus swerving off the road as panic set in. I could picture it all, but it wasn't just horror. It was confusion. The kids had no idea what they were dealing with. That's what made it worse. As I reread the note, I noticed something odd. The word took was scratched out and rewritten several times. The first version looked like 8. The second, dragged, but eventually they settled on took. Even in that moment, covered in blood, surrounded by panic, some part of this kid struggled to find the right word to describe it, because nothing fit. I pulled out a magnifying glass and stared closer. A fingerprint, tiny, smudged in red. Maybe blood, maybe marker. I traced it across the page until it vanished halfway through the sentence. We were all driving to the field trip to the zoo. That's when the image flashed in my mind, bright and sudden, like a memory I never lived. Rows of children laughing, a teacher handing out snacks, a bus filled with light, then a dark shape blotting out the sun through the side window, a shadow without source. It touched the glass, and everything changed. I shivered violently. That hadn't come from me. That was someone else's memory. No, that was the note showing me. I slammed the notebook shut and tossed it across the room. My breath came out ragged, lungs trembling like they weren't sure if the air was safe anymore. The room had grown colder, not by degrees, by presence, like something had just stepped inside and brought the void with it. I turned slowly toward my apartment window. It was fogged over from the inside. My breath caught. I hadn't opened that window in months, and yet, something had drawn a symbol in the condensation. It looked like an eye. No, a window. A long oval with lines across it like panes. But at the center, a black smear, like a pupil. I didn't even clean it. I packed a bag and drove back to the bus. It was stored in the back lot of the Fair Hollow Police Department, behind a locked chain-link fence. The sky was overcast, gray clouds brewing into something more aggressive. But no rain, just static in the air. I parked 2 streets over and snuck in through a break in the fence. No one saw me, or maybe they just didn't care. Maybe the bus had already cursed anyone who got too close. It sat there, hunched like a dying animal. Even in daylight, it looked off. The shadows inside didn't match the sun. Some seats looked deeper than others. The windshield was clean now, but I could still see the stain marks etched in memory. I climbed the steps slowly, the metal groaning beneath my feet. The air inside was still wrong, heavy, greasy with dread. The silence didn't just press against your ears. It filled them. I moved toward the driver's seat, exactly where the note had said Mr. Charles was last seen. The seatbelt was twisted unnaturally, almost melted in parts. The seat cushion was torn open from underneath, as though something had crawled out of it. That's when I saw another piece of paper, tucked into the rubber flap beneath the dashboard, folded but thicker than the first, yellowed, as though it had been there longer. I pulled it free. It wasn't written in a child's hand. It was cursive, elegant, and terrified. To whomever finds this, I pray you never read it. But if you have, then you already know. You've seen it, felt it, maybe even heard it scratching at the edges of your thoughts. That means it's watching you now, just like it watched us. I looked around the bus. My heartbeat quickened. We thought it was a fluke, a one-time haunting, a mistake. But it's not. It waits for these kinds of places. Liminal spaces, transient moments, roads between destinations. It latches onto people who are trapped in motion. It loves windows. My throat clenched. It needs you to see it, but only a little. Just a glimpse, a reflection in glass, the shimmer in a mirror, the shine on a phone screen. Once it knows you've noticed it, it follows. Doesn't matter if you close your eyes after that. You've been claimed. This bus isn't just haunted, it's infected. And now, so are you. There was no signature, no date, just a final sentence scrawled sideways along the bottom of the page in what looked like dried blood. Tell them not to look. I heard a creak from behind me, slowly, like a whisper of bones shifting. I turned. The last seat on the bus was now occupied. A figure sat motionless, child-sized, blackened skin like soot, its face half turned toward the window, its arms dangling too long to be human. And in the reflection on the opposite glass, I saw myself staring at it. Our eyes met. For just a second, the figure smiled. Then it was gone. But its reflection remained. I didn't leave the bus. I fled. The paper with the elegant handwriting was clutched so tight in my hand it tore. My legs stumbled on the metal steps as I bolted out, nearly hitting my head on the roof as I ducked through the narrow door. I landed in the dirt on all fours, sucking air like I'd just escaped a fire. But it wasn't smoke that had choked me. It was the air inside that thing. Thick, hungry. I backed away without turning around. Some primal part of me screamed not to expose my back. I didn't look at the windows again. I didn't want to see if it was still reflected there. I didn't want to see myself again, watching something watch me. Only when I reached my car did I breathe again. But the images followed me. The figure, the reflection, that damned smile. I should have stopped. I should have burned the photos, called a priest, anything. But curiosity is a terrible disease, and I was already terminal. That night, I returned to the notes. The police had confiscated the bus, and the boy was under medical lockdown, but they hadn't found the letters I did. I had 5 of them now, each with different handwriting, different fears, all written by terrified children, caught in something no child should ever know. I spread them out on my floor like a puzzle. I read them over and over. We're all scared, okay? That thing got Sarah and Tommy. That was the second letter I'd found. Blood-stained. The handwriting jerky, as if written while crying. Long, elongated white hands came through the window and grabbed their heads. I paused. The phrase was repeated in 2 separate notes. Long, elongated, white. The shape I'd seen in the bus mirror hadn't had color. Not really. But now that I remembered, its arms hadn't bent right. Too many joints. Too fluid. That night, I couldn't stay in my apartment. Every surface reflected something. The oven, the TV, the sink, even the corner of my watch. I wrapped every reflective surface in black cloth, then shoved them into closets, turned everything to the wall, and left the bathroom light off. I even considered gouging out the glass in picture frames. Still, it didn't matter. At 3:07 a.m., I heard scratching, not from the door, from the window. My bedroom is on the 3rd floor. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I lay there under the covers, heart pounding like a jackhammer, every muscle locked. The scratching came in slow, deliberate patterns. Not random, not desperate. It was writing. I reached for my phone, slowly, trying not to shift the blankets. I turned on the screen. The black glass reflected the window for a moment, and I saw a hand, pressed against the other side of the glass. Long, thin, bone white. Not 5 fingers, 7. Then it slid downward, and the sound faded. I didn't sleep again. By morning, I drove to the only place I thought might offer answers, Chestnut Ridge Elementary. I knew the field trip had been organized through the school. I needed to know more about the people on that bus, the kids, the teachers, Mr. Charles, Mrs. Laramie, Mr. Hopkins. Maybe if I knew more about them, I'd know why it happened. The building was quiet when I arrived, too quiet for 8 a.m. A paper taped to the front door explained it, closed for investigation. All classes suspended until further notice. I walked around the back, found a janitor unloading trash bags into the dumpster. I flashed my press badge and offered him $50 just to talk. His name was Bill. He'd worked there 20 years. And when I asked about the bus, he didn't laugh. He didn't even flinch. "You're not the first one I'm asking," he said, eyes dark under his cap. "They keep trying to bury it. But something followed that bus back here before it vanished. Kids started seeing things in the bathroom mirrors, in classroom windows, hell, even the lunch trays." "What kinds of things?" He hesitated. "Their reflections, moving out of sync." My stomach clenched. "Any idea what it was?" I asked. He shook his head, but it started after a girl named Sarah transferred here last semester. I froze. Sarah, the same name from the second note. "She was quiet," he said, lowering his voice. "Kinda off. Her drawings were banned by the art teacher. One kid said she talked to someone who lived in the mirror behind the nurse's office. Said she called it her window friend." Goosebumps climbed my arms. "She disappeared a few days before the trip. Everyone assumed she just ran away, but they let her name stay on the trip list." My mouth went dry. "So she was on that bus?" He nodded. "I think whatever this friend was," Bill muttered, "it wasn't done with her. And when she left, it went too." I drove home shaking. Everything inside me screamed that I should drop the story, leave town, burn every note I had. But when I opened my apartment door, I stopped cold. There, lying on the floor in the middle of the living room, was a 6th note, folded neatly. I hadn't brought it in. I hadn't even left the window unlocked. My knees nearly gave as I picked it up. "We're not supposed to see it. That's the trick. It doesn't like to be seen, until it knows it's too late. The more we look, the more it notices. It likes when we're scared, when we look anyway, because when we see it, it sees us back." The handwriting was familiar. It was Elliot's, dated today. I don't remember falling asleep. I only remember waking up screaming. My apartment was dark, except for the faint red glow from the alarm clock. 4:11 a.m. My skin was soaked in sweat, heart jackhammering against my ribs. My throat ached like I'd been yelling for hours. And then, silence. Too much silence. The kind that presses in around you, like sound had been pulled out of the air. I sat up slowly. The sixth note, Elliot's, was still crumpled on the floor where I'd dropped it. When we see it, it sees us back. There was something else on the paper now. I didn't remember it being there before. The corner had a faint red smear. Not ink, not blood, lipstick, and drawn in jagged, childlike handwriting. Look behind you. I refused. I didn't turn. I didn't move. I sat frozen, forcing my eyes to stay forward. But in the reflection on the dark glass of my TV screen, I saw a shape behind me. Tall, thin, pale, not moving, just watching. And then it waved. I screamed. When I finally had the courage to turn, there was nothing there. The shape was gone. But I knew something had changed. It had gotten closer. It was in now. Not just at the windows. Not just outside. Inside me. The next few days blurred. Time lost its rhythm. I forgot to eat. I forgot to sleep. I could no longer tell whether I was seeing the creature or just the idea of it. It lurked behind every polished surface. A reflection. A shadow out of step. A grin lingering a second too long in a mirror. And the notes kept coming. Under my door, inside my fridge, in my wallet, each one different, each one worse. Mrs. Laramie is in shock. She won't stop rocking. We tried to talk to her, but she won't answer. Just stares at the floor, whispering something. I think it's numbers. Another. Mr. Hopkins said we're cursed. Said he saw it years ago, on a different trip. Said it comes back every 7 years. Said it never stops looking through glass. And then one that chilled me to the core. It's not just one of them. There are more. Reflections are doorways, and they're all hungry. This wasn't just one entity. This was a species, a hive, a dimension full of watchers behind glass. And one of them had latched onto that bus. Or maybe Sarah had brought it with her. I needed answers. Not just from paper. I needed to talk to Mrs. Laramie. I called in every favor I had, begged a former cop contact to get me into the long-term psychiatric wing at Fair Hollow General. Mrs. Laramie had been transferred there 2 days after the incident. Nonverbal, delusional, diagnosed with acute psychosis. She hadn't spoken a word to anyone. Until I walked in. She was sitting in a padded chair beside the window, pale, frail, rocking slowly, whispering under her breath. Mrs. Laramie? I said gently. Her eyes flicked toward me, then to the window. No mirrors, she muttered. No windows, no silverware. We forgot the silverware. I knelt beside her. I found the notes. I've seen it too. Her rocking stopped. She turned to me. Her voice dropped to a whisper so faint, I had to lean in. They promised safety. If we offered 5. 5 to feed. 5 to open the way. My mouth went dry. 5 what? I asked. Children, she said. That's why Sarah came. That's why they left her on the list. She invited them. She thought it was a game. I backed away. Mrs. Laramie's eyes widened suddenly. She pointed behind me. It's here. I turned reflexively. The window across from her chair was fogging over. A handprint appeared on the inside, and then another, and another. 7 fingers each. The nurses burst in moments later when they heard the crash. I hadn't realized I'd fallen over the chair. Mrs. Laramie was screaming now. Her eyes rolled back, and she collapsed into violent convulsions. I was escorted out immediately. They said I triggered her episode. But as they pushed me out into the hallway, I noticed the lights flickering in the reflective surface of the floor wax. There were shapes moving between the pulses. Not human. When I got back to my apartment, it was waiting. Not the creature. A letter. Folded neatly. Inside my refrigerator. It wasn't written on notebook paper like the others. It was on police stationery. From Officer Ramirez. I'm not supposed to say this, but there were more than notes in that bus. We found drawings, symbols, carvings into the metal under the seats. They weren't done by children. And the windows, every single one was inward facing, a trick of the curvature. The creature wasn't breaking in. The bus was shaped to let it see them all. I think someone built it that way. I dropped the letter. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Only 4 left now. They're almost done feeding. My reflection on the black screen blinked, but I didn't. I couldn't go outside anymore. Not during the day. Not because the entity feared light. Because I did. Sunlight meant reflections. Car windows, storefront glass, the glare off someone's sunglasses. Even puddles on the sidewalk became traps. Doorways, gateways, eyes. I kept my apartment in darkness now. Every surface draped in fabric. Every window blacked out with tape and cardboard. But it never helped. The reflections moved, sometimes slowly, sometimes not at all. And that was worse. You start questioning if your reflection blinked when you didn't, or smiled when you were crying. But the worst was the mirror I didn't own. One morning, I opened my closet and saw a new note, stuck to the inside of the door. Torn from a spiral notebook, child's handwriting, familiar now. This one was damp, warped by time and what looked like dried salt water. Maybe tears. It read, "If anyone sees this note, tell my parents I love them. There's only 5 of us left. Marcus can't see, so we hope he makes it. We're going to try something. 2 of us on each side, holding hands. Maybe looking in the windows together will work. Maybe if we do it at the same time, Marcus will live. See you on the other side. John." I sat there, staring at the paper, tears silently tracing down my face. This was the final moment. This was the children's last stand. A desperate idea drawn from nothing but fear and scraps of hope. And it had failed. I knew it had failed, because only Elliot had survived, and even he hadn't escaped. Not really. I saw it in his eyes that day in the hospital. Something else was in there, watching me through him. But John, he'd tried. He'd tried to save Marcus, to give meaning to the madness, to buy time for someone, anyone, to get away. And then I remembered something Elliot said to me the very first time we met. Marcus can't see. What if that wasn't a detail? What if that was the answer? I scrambled for the bag where I kept the other letters. I pulled them out, laying them on the table. I reread everything, line by line, trying to decode something that had never been hidden in the first place. If we all looked at the windows together, they thought unity might break it. Maybe if we all do this, Marcus will live. But Marcus couldn't see, and maybe that's why he was still breathing when John wrote the note. I had to find him. If he was still alive. I started by digging through the missing persons database for the county. All 27 students from the bus were listed. 19 bodies still unaccounted for. 2 identified by dental records. 3 found in twisted shapes beneath the forest floor. They were buried in perfect squares. But Marcus's name wasn't listed as deceased. No record of a body, no follow-up. I cross-referenced every known address, found his parents. They'd moved away, to avoid the press, the stares, the endless pity, to forget. But they hadn't taken Marcus with them. He was in a long-term care facility, blind, mute, alive. 2 hours later, I was there. The building was quiet, clean. A soft, unsettling hum filled the halls. Somewhere between a lullaby and a refrigerator buzz, the nurse at the desk gave me a blank stare when I asked about Marcus. Said no one visited him anymore. Said he hardly moved. She showed me to the room, and there he was, thin, pale, seated by a window. His eyes didn't follow me when I entered, but he turned his head ever so slightly, like he could smell my fear. I pulled up a chair beside him. "Hi, Marcus," I whispered. "My name is Michael. I think you might be the only person left who understands." No response, but he blinked once. I took that as permission to continue. I read John's note. "I know what happened on that bus. I know what you tried to do, and I know you couldn't see it, but maybe that saved you. Maybe that's why it couldn't take you." Still nothing, until his lips moved, barely. He mouthed a word I didn't understand. I leaned closer. "What?" He mouthed it again. This time I got it. Reflections. And then he raised his hand, slowly, trembling, and pointed, not at the window, at my watch. I followed his gesture. The glass face of my wristwatch had fogged over from the inside. Then something tapped it. Once, twice, 7 times. I yanked the watch off and hurled it across the room. Marcus flinched but didn't stop me. He whispered again, "Don't let it see you." "What does it want, Marcus?" He turned his face toward mine. There was no expression, just raw, empty knowing, to be remembered. That's when I understood. This thing, it feeds on memory, trauma, echoes, the retelling. That's why the notes kept appearing, why the story wouldn't end. Because I was writing it. Because you are reading it. It spreads through the telling, through mirrors, through any surface that carries an image of it, even if it's just in the mind. And every time we look, we open the door a little wider. I didn't drive home that night. I left the facility shaking, Marcus's words echoing in my skull like a death sentence. To be remembered. Don't let it see you. But I had seen it. Worse, I had recorded it, captured its story in photographs, in notes, in thoughts. I'd printed its reflection into the world over and over again, spread its image like a plague. And now, I was part of it. I stayed in a motel off Route 19. No windows, no mirrors, no TV. I duct-taped my phone screen, wore blacked-out sunglasses, covered every glinting surface in my car with newspaper and paint. I didn't shave, didn't look at myself in the mirror, but it wasn't enough. Because the final note appeared, folded in my pillowcase, different paper, different handwriting. It looked older, faded, wrinkled, written in pen that had bled into the grain. And in the corner, a water-damaged sticker of a giraffe. The zoo. The destination that was never reached. It read, "We shouldn't have looked. We shouldn't have screamed. It feeds on that. The more afraid we were, the stronger it got. We thought if we named it, we could survive. But it has no name. It was born between reflections, a parasite in the pause between light and shadow. It doesn't want to kill. It wants to last. It wants to echo, to ripple, to become real in the places we remember. The more we think of it, the more it roots itself in this world." And the last line, we tried to contain it in the bus, but someone opened the door again. I didn't need to guess who. It was me. I had entered the bus, photographed it, published the article, shared the story, passed the notes around, fed the fire, given it form, and I wasn't the only one. When I returned to my apartment 3 days later, there were people waiting. Not police, not journalists, agents, plain clothes, quiet voices, no names. They said the hospital had burned, that Marcus was gone, that no bodies were recovered from the wing. They showed me a picture. It wasn't of Marcus. It was of me, staring directly into a window, my hands pressed to the glass, my eyes glowing white, my mouth open in a silent scream. I don't remember that moment, but they said it was taken by a nurse seconds before her phone shattered. They asked me one question: how many others have you told? I didn't answer. I couldn't, because the truth was, I hadn't told enough. The story wasn't stopping. The notes were still coming. I received another that night, in my toothpaste tube. I don't know how it fit, or why the paper wasn't destroyed, but when I squeezed, the paste came out curled around it like a tongue. This one said, "We're not passengers anymore. We're part of the ride, and it's still moving." The next morning, I saw something on the news. A school bus had gone missing in Oregon, another in Ohio. In both cases, final communication came from the drivers, describing fog rolling in too fast, strange shadows crossing the road, windows shattering without impact. Neither bus was found, but local hikers in both states reported finding torn notebook pages in the woods, scrawled in children's handwriting. One of them said, "He's on the bus now, the man with the camera. He brought the story back." I dropped the coffee I was holding. Shards of ceramic cut my hand. The next note arrived, folded between the pages of a book I never owned. Then, in a napkin at a diner I hadn't entered. Then tucked inside the mirror on my car's passenger side visor. They weren't just messages anymore. They were warnings, or worse, recruitment letters. A week later, I received a package. No return address. Inside, my camera, the one I had used the day I first boarded the bus. But the memory card wasn't blank. It was full. Hundreds of images, many of which I never remembered taking. Each one of the bus interior, the seats, the blood, the notes, the children's faces. And then, one I did remember, the final shot I had taken before leaving the bus. At the very back, just before I turned away. Except this time, in the photo, there was something else. A man sitting in the driver's seat, wearing my clothes, staring into the rearview mirror, grinning. And in the mirror's reflection, you, reading this, right now, staring back.